Imagine you're shown a set of economic policies ideas about how the government should manage its budget. When people in the UK were asked if they supported these policies, the answer was a clear yes. A solid 52% of the public was on board. It seemed like a sensible, popular plan. But then, the researchers did something interesting. They ran the exact same poll with the exact same policies, but they made one tiny change. They told the next group of people who was behind the ideas. The chancellor at the time, George Osborne, and his political rival, Ed Balls. Suddenly, everything flipped. Support plummeted from 52% down to just 37%. Opposition skyrocketed. The policies hadn't changed by a single word, but the simple attachment of two names made people completely reverse their judgment. Nothing changed, and yet everything did. What is this invisible force that can make a popular idea unpopular in an instant? It's not about facts or figures. It's about bias, and it shapes our world far more than we realize. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really going deep into those invisible forces, the ones that subtly, but profoundly shape our perceptions, our beliefs, even our big decisions. And often, we don't even realize it's happening.
It's true. It's everywhere.
We're going to pull back the curtain on bias and framing. We'll look at how these ideas play out in, public policy, international conflicts, even the stuff you buy.
Everyday choices.
Our mission today is to figure out what these forces actually are. Why are they so powerful? And importantly, what does this all mean for you navigating this world just packed with information? Hopefully you'll have a few aha moments about how you see things.
That opening example is just perfect, isn't it? It shows how easily our minds can be swayed, not by new facts, but just by how information is presented or who it comes from.
Exactly.
And that's really the core of what we call framing in social sciences. It's more than just having a personal bias. Think of it as the way we organize reality, how individuals, groups, whole societies, how we perceive and talk about the world.
So it's not just that I have a bias, like preferring one thing over another, but the way I even understand the situation is already kind of filtered through a frame.
Precisely. Yeah, you've got it. It's like the first lens you look through. And sometimes you choose it. Sometimes it's kind of given to you. We can break it down a bit. There are frames in thought. Those are internal mental maps, right? The interpretations, the shortcuts we use inside our heads to make sense of a really complex world.
With the internal stuff.
Yeah. And then there are frames in communication. That's how those internal frames get shared, through the words we pick, the images, the metaphors, even, subtle body language.
Right.
And the main point of all this, framing helps cut through the fog. It reduces ambiguity. When you face a ton of information or a complex topic, framing gives it context. It lets you connect the new stuff to what you already know, makes it more digestible.
Like a mental shortcut almost. A necessary one, maybe.
You could call it cognitive scaffolding, yeah. It helps us manage information overload, which, let's face it, is constant these days.
Absolutely. I feel like I need that scaffolding just for this conversation sometimes. Could you give us an everyday example, something simple to really illustrate framing?
Sure, happy to. Think about someone quickly closing and opening their eye. Just like that. A simple physical action.
Okay. A blink.
Well, maybe. Your interpretation depends entirely on the frame you put on it, usually unconsciously. If you use a physical frame, you might think, oh, dust in their eye. It's just an involuntary blink, no real meaning.
Right, just biology.
But if you apply a social frame, you might see it as a wink. Suddenly it's deliberate. It means something: humor, agreement, a secret maybe.
Same action, totally different meaning.
Exactly. The physical movement is identical, but the frame transforms it. And this happens all the time. We're constantly projecting these frames onto everything to make sense of it.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
It shows how much we add to what we see. So when we talk about communication, like in the media or politics, is framing basically the same as agenda setting? Deciding what topics get covered?
That's a really good question. And they're related, but not quite the same. People often mix them up. Agenda setting is more about what issues get talked about. Bringing a topic onto the public stage, making it seem important, increasing its salience.
So putting it on the map.
Right. Framing, though, takes an issue that's already on the map and selects specific aspects of it. It emphasizes certain parts of the story, making them more prominent. And by doing that, it encourages certain ways of thinking about it and discourages others.
So agenda setting is what we talk about. Framing is how we talk about it.
You got it. It's about the emphasis. And look, it's not always about deliberate deception, though it can be. Often, it's just how we naturally organize complex information to make it understandable and connect with what people already believe.
Okay, that makes sense. But it sounds like these mental shortcuts, these frames, can also lead us pretty far astray sometimes. Like our perception of reality gets warped.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes the degree of warping is, well, quite shocking. There's a fascinating study by Ipsos called The Perils of Perception.
Perils of perception.
Oh.
Sounds ominous.
It kind of is. They surveyed people in 33 countries, asking them to estimate basic facts about their own societies. And the results revealed these huge gaps between what people thought was true and the actual reality. They even called it a global index of ignorance.
An index of ignorance. Wow. Okay, hit me with some examples. How wrong were people?
Prepare yourself. In Britain, people guessed that the richest 1% owned about 59% of the country's wealth. 59%.
Okay, that sounds high, but maybe plausible.
The actual figure, just 23%.
Whoa! Less than half of what people thought. Okay, what else?
Still in the UK, people thought 43% of young adults, like 25 to 34-year-olds, lived at home with their parents. The reality, only 14%.
Another massive overestimate.
Yep. Over in the US, the average guess for the immigrant population was 33%. The actual number, 14%.
Again, more than double the reality.
And one more in Saudi Arabia, people estimated only 28% of the population was overweight or obese, but the real figure was a staggering 71%.
That's completely flipped.
Yeah.
Underestimating a huge public health issue.
Exactly. These aren't small errors, are they? It's like a collective misperception of reality.
Definitely. So the study ranked countries. Who was the most ignorant, according to their index?
Mexico came out as the most inaccurate in that particular study, while South Korea was the most accurate. But the key thing isn't just the ranking. It's that this tendency to misperceive is incredibly widespread. It's a human thing, not just specific to one culture or country.
Which suggests there must be some common reasons why our minds consistently get things so wrong. What did the study find? What's in this ignorance equation?
They pinpointed 5 core reasons. The first one is pretty straightforward, actually. Mathematical and statistical ability, or maybe the lack thereof for many of us.
And numbers. My old nemesis.
You're not alone. Many people just struggle with basic numerical concepts needed to estimate these things accurately. Like in the UK, most people could identify 50 as 25% of 200, but still 8% got that wrong.
8%. Okay.
And finding a simple average, 30% got that wrong. Basic probability. Only about a quarter of Brits knew the chance of getting 2 heads in 2 coin tosses is 25%.
Yeah, probability always trips people up, myself included. And big numbers, small numbers. My brain just kind of glazes over.
That's exactly what the study suggests. We struggle with very large numbers, like national populations or budgets, and very small numbers, like the rate of rare events. And we often confuse rates, like the percentage of immigrants arriving each year, with levels, the total percentage in the population.
Right. So a fundamental difficulty with just handling numbers is step 1.
It's a big, often overlooked factor, yeah. Foundational numeracy issues.
Okay, makes sense. What's reason number 2 for our collective misperceptions?
Reason 2 is our reliance on biases and heuristics, mental shortcuts. You know, Daniel Kahneman's fast thinking, or System 1, our brain grabs the easiest information available, even if it's not the best fit.
Right, the quick and dirty way of thinking. Saves energy, but can be wrong.
Exactly, like the availability bias. Why do people overestimate rural populations? Probably because rural areas cover more land on a map. That visual is readily available, even though cities are much denser. The landmass fact is easier to grab than population density data.
So we go with what's easy to picture or recall, like remembering a dramatic news story.
That's coming up. But related to this is satisficing. When answering questions, we often don't aim for the perfect answer, just one that's good enough.
Good enough is good enough, right?
Sometimes. But take teenage pregnancy rates. In the US, the average guess was 24%. Actual rate, about 3%. Why the huge gap? Partly concern, sure, but it's also easier to recall the total number of teens who give birth, which is a bigger number than the annual rate. So we satisfy with the easier, bigger number.
Grabbing the wrong statistic because it's easier to access mentally.
Precisely. And then there's inductive generalization. We assume our own situation is typical. Like, the study found Indian internet users vastly overestimated national internet access. Why? Because they had it. They generalized from their own unrepresentative bubble.
I can definitely see that happening. We all live in our own bubbles to some extent. Okay, so faulty math skills, mental shortcuts. What's number 3?
Number 3 is fascinating. Emotional innumeracy. This theory suggests that when we answer these kinds of questions, we're not just trying to be accurate, we might also have directional goals.
directional goals, like trying to steer the answer somehow?
Sort of. It means we might be trying to send a message about what worries us or what we want to be true or what we think should be the focus. Our emotions get tangled up with the numbers.
So if I'm really worried about crime, I might unconsciously inflate my estimate of the crime rate, not just because I'm bad at stats, but because I want to signal my concern.
That's the idea. Overestimations of things like crime, terrorism, teenage pregnancy often track pretty closely with public anxiety about those issues. We're expressing worry through our numbers.
And the flip side, underestimating things like obesity
could mean we're less worried than we should be, or perhaps there's some discomfort or denial involved in facing the true scale of the problem. But importantly, this doesn't mean bombarding people with scary stats is the answer. That can backfire.
Right, because fear can just make people shut down.
Exactly. But it shows our emotional state, deeply colors our perception of facts and figures.
Okay, that's a big one. Our feelings messing with the facts.
Yeah.
What's number 4? You hinted at the media.
Number 4, the media and the power of anecdote. Yes, the media plays a huge role. But it's not just about, say, tabloids sensationalizing things. It connects back to our psychology.
How so?
We are just fundamentally more likely to remember negative news, dramatic stories, vivid anecdotes, even if they describe incredibly rare events. Think plane crashes versus car accidents.
Yeah, plane crashes dominate the news, even though driving is statistically far riskier.
Precisely. It's not necessarily that the media is always trying to mislead, though sometimes they might. It's partly that our brains are wired to pay attention to threats, novelty, drama. Those stories stick. So a single, powerful anecdote can outweigh mountains of statistical data in our minds. It's a memory and attention bias thing as much as a media thing.
Our brains latch onto the vivid story, not the boring spreadsheet.
Pretty much, which distorts our sense of frequency and risk. Okay, the 5th and final reason is maybe the most provocative, rational ignorance.
Rational ignorance? That sounds contradictory. How can ignorance be rational?
Well, this theory, mainly from Professor Ilya Somin, argues that in many political contexts, being uninformed is actually a rational response.
Okay, explain that, because it sounds wrong.
Think about it. If your individual vote in a large election has almost zero statistical chance of actually changing the outcome, why spend hours and hours researching complex policy details? The cost, time, effort, mental energy of becoming truly informed is high. The direct personal benefit in terms of influencing the result, practically zero.
So it's not worth the effort, basically.
From a purely individual, self-interested calculation perspective, the argument goes, maybe not. So our collective lack of detailed knowledge about government spending or crime stats isn't necessarily because we're unintelligent. It might be a logical adaptation to a system where individual input feels, and often is, negligible.
That's a pretty bleak take on democracy, isn't it?
It's definitely a challenging perspective. So Tommen suggests that if you want a more informed public, maybe you need systems with more local control, where individual choices have more direct, tangible consequences. That makes the cost-benefit calculation for getting informed look very different.
Wow. Okay, so 5 big reasons. Math struggles, mental shortcuts, emotional interference, media anecdote power, and maybe even rational ignorance. It paints a picture of minds that are easily swayed and often inaccurate. How does this play out in the political arena where people are actively trying to sway us?
That's where framing becomes a deliberate strategic tool. In politics, it's all about packaging your message to encourage your preferred interpretation and shut down others. Often, it involves defining a problem in a way that naturally leads to your party's preferred solution.
So it's weaponized communication, essentially.
Yeah.
Playing on these biases we've just discussed, especially things like confirmation bias or our emotional responses.
It definitely leverages them. Take the work of Frank Luntz, the Republican strategist. He explicitly advised conservatives on language. Don't say drilling for oil, say exploring for energy.
Sounds much cleaner, more positive.
Right. Don't attack government, attack Washington. Government paves roads, fights fires. Washington sounds like bureaucracy, waste, distance.
Taps into different feelings, different frames.
Exactly. And avoid the word outsourcing. It immediately puts you on the defensive about jobs leaving. These are conscious choices designed to frame the debate before it even starts.
It really shows the power of just a few words, like tax relief. That sounds inherently good, doesn't it? Who wouldn't want relief?
Precisely. That frame implies taxes are a burden, an affliction. Reducing them is relief. It casts government as the taker. But you could frame taxes differently, right, as infrastructural support or public investment.
Yeah, emphasizing what taxes pay for roads, schools, the systems businesses rely on.
Exactly. That frame highlights the shared benefits, the necessity. Neither frame is factually wrong, but they evoke totally different feelings and lead to different policy conclusions. It's framing the purpose.
And we saw a huge example of this after 9/11, right? The shift in language there had massive consequences.
A critical example. The initial framing was often crime, but very quickly it shifted to a war metaphor, the war on terror.
And that changed everything.
Fundamentally. Framing it as crime suggests investigation, trials, justice system responses. Framing it as war implies military action, enemy combatants, expanded executive powers, interventions abroad. The choice of metaphor dictated the perceived range of acceptable responses.
It's sobering how much rests on a single word choice in those moments. Can you give a few more examples of these politically charged word choices?
Sure. Think about increasing troops in Iraq. Was it an escalation? That sounds like digging deeper, maybe unwisely. Or was it a surge? That sounds powerful, decisive, maybe temporary.
Very different connotation.
Totally. Or describing a problem within an organization. Is it a few bad apples? That suggests you just remove the individuals, or is it systematic rot? That implies the whole structure needs fixing.
Big difference in the scale of the solution needed.
Right. Even taxpayers' money versus public funds. Is it my money the government is spending, implying I have a strong individual claim? Or is it our money, a shared resource for collective benefit? It subtly shifts the power dynamic.
These examples really drive home how carefully language is chosen. And it's not just politicians. The media plays a huge role in reinforcing or challenging these frames, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical. And not just by repeating what politicians say, they actively shape the narrative too. A study looked at U.S. media coverage after 9/11. While they reported Bush's speeches, they often didn't adopt his framing wholesale.
Oh, how so?
Bush used frames like good versus evil, civilization versus barbarism. The study found major news outlets often just didn't mention those frames. And where Bush talked about an enduring global war, the press often framed it more ambiguously, like war or police action.
So they reported the news, but resisted fully adopting the administration's preferred interpretation. They offered alternative frames.
In many cases, yes. It shows the media isn't always just a passive conduit. It can actively contest and reframe narratives, which in turn influences public understanding.
That's a crucial nuance. And this framing power affects how we see international events too, especially when comparing incidents involving different countries.
Dramatically. Look at the coverage of two downed civilian airliners. Korean Airlines Flight 007 shot down by the Soviets in '83, and Iran Air Flight 655 shot down by the U.S. Navy in '88.
Okay, two tragedies involving major powers. How is the coverage different?
Starkly different. The Soviet downing. U.S. media framed it as a moral outrage. Huge coverage. Time and Newsweek ran 51 pages combined. CBS News aired over 300 minutes. Lots of focus on Soviet culpability, the victims.
Right, treated as a major international incident, an act of aggression.
Exactly. The U.S. downing of the Iranian plane, framed primarily as a technical problem, a tragic mistake under pressure. Much less coverage, 20 pages in the same magazines, about 200 minutes on CBS. The framing downplayed U.S. agency, focused less on the victims.
Wow. Same outcome, civilian plane destroyed, but framed completely differently based on who was responsible. One an outrage, the other a technical issue.
It's a powerful example of how framing directs empathy and blame. And this isn't just for huge geopolitical events. It happens with everyday things like food.
Food. How does framing affect how we see, say, groceries?
Remember that classic study? Beef labeled 75% lean was rated much more positively by consumers than the exact same beef labeled 25% fat.
Same product, different label, positive frame wins.
Yep. The positive attribute lean works better than the negative fat. We even saw framing effects with COVID-19 messaging. Messages framed around loss, if you don't wear a mask, lives will be lost, definitely increased anxiety.
Okay. Seemed like they would. Did they work better?
Surprisingly, they showed little or no more benefit in getting people to actually follow guidelines compared to gain-framed messages, like focusing on protecting yourself and others. Sometimes fear increases anxiety without actually changing behavior effectively.
Fascinating. Fear isn't always the best motivator, even when the threat is real. This makes me think about another huge, long-term issue where framing is absolutely crucial. Climate change. How has framing shaped that whole conversation?
Oh, climate change is a masterclass in framing battles. The activism itself has a long history, from Thoreau and John Muir Loving Wilderness to Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, really kicking off the modern environmental movement, the first Earth Day.
Right, it's been evolving for a long time.
And today you have youth activists like Greta Thunberg, groups like Extinction Rebellion, all using different frames to try and spur action.
So what frames have worked best, especially in places like the U.S. where it's so politicized?
Research there suggests that a public health frame is often the most effective.
Public health. Not melting glaciers or polar bears.
Those are important, but they can feel abstract, distant. The public health frame connects climate change to things that feel immediate and local. Cleaner air in your city, fewer asthma attacks for your kids, reducing heat stroke risk in your community.
Ah, okay. It makes it personal, tangible, about us here and now, not just them over there later.
Exactly. It translates the big global issue into concrete local health benefits. That resonates more broadly than just focusing on the environmental science alone sometimes.
But even with that effective frame, there seem to be these deep psychological roadblocks preventing more people from acting, right?
Absolutely. Our brains just aren't naturally well equipped to handle a threat like climate change. There are at least 6 big challenges.
6. Okay, let's hear them.
1, it's abstractness. It's slow, diffuse, not a clear enemy. 2, blamelessness. Everyday actions contributing to it don't feel morally wrong, like, say, theft does. 3, guilty bias. Facing our role triggers defensiveness, denial. 4, uncertainty. Our brains hate ambiguity, so we latch onto wishful thinking. 5, moral tribalism. It's become so politicized, it's about group identity, not just facts.
Loyalty over logic sometimes.
And 6, distance. The worst impacts often seem far away in time or space, affecting people we perceive as an outgroup, which dampens our immediate empathy.
That is quite a list of hurdles. It explains why just shouting facts louder doesn't work. So the messaging style must be critical. Dire warnings versus positive solutions. What's the verdict?
Well, dire messaging, the catastrophic scenarios gets attention, but it often backfires. It's criticized as alarmist, and crucially, it can threaten our deep-seated belief that the world is fundamentally just and controllable.
Our just world beliefs. So overwhelming threat leads to denial.
Often, yes. Or apathy, paralysis. Fear can raise awareness, but it needs to be balanced with hope, or it just shuts people down. Studies show overly dire messaging can actually reduce the effectiveness of climate advocacy.
Okay, so fear alone isn't the answer. What about positive framing? What does that look like?
It's generally much more effective for sustained action. We're talking prognostic framing, offering clear solutions, pathways, strategies. Combine that with motivational framing.
Motivational how?
By tapping into positive psychology, 4 things motivate. Agency, believing your actions matter. Compassion, caring for others, for nature. Purpose, feeling like you're contributing to something meaningful. And resilience, bouncing back from setbacks.
So empower people, connect to values, offer hope.
Exactly. Hope is key. It boosts agency and resilience. Trust in collective action is also vital, seeing that working together can make a difference. And framing climate action around positive feelings, pride, gratitude, improved well-being makes it feel rewarding, not just a burden.
And you mentioned utopian narratives, painting a picture of a better future.
Yes. Instead of just dystopia, paint a compelling picture of a desirable, sustainable future. Imagine it's 2050. Clean, rapid transit, green energy hubs replacing old industries, healthy local food. That kind of thing generates excitement, aspiration. It gives people something positive to strive for, not just something negative to run from.
Makes sense. Focus on the destination, not just the danger. But as you said, climate change is intensely politicized. How do things like political ideology or even gender norms complicate this?
Hugely. You have to be strategic. Conservatives often prioritize different values, security, purity, tradition, individual responsibility, than liberals who might prioritize care, fairness, collective good, openness to change.
So the same message won't work for everyone.
Definitely not. To reach conservatives, framing environmentalism around purity, keeping nature clean, or stewardship, responsibly managing resources can be more effective. Sometimes you even need non-climate frames. Focusing on the economic benefits of renewables or energy independence or national security, these frames appeal across the political spectrum much more than purely climate-focused arguments, which immediately trigger partisan reactions.
So sometimes you achieve green goals by talking about Well, money or security. Interesting. What about gender? How does that fit in?
It's subtle, but there. Some research suggests traditionally feminine norms or behaviors, maybe certain mobility patterns, lower consumption align better with sustainability goals. There's also evidence of a green feminine stereotype.
Meaning?
People perceive green behaviors or products as more feminine, and this can affect choices. One study found that men whose masculinity felt threatened were less likely to choose green options afterwards.
Wow. So environmental choices can get tangled up with performing gender identity.
It seems so. It's another unconscious layer influencing decisions we might think are purely rational or environmental.
That adds incredible complexity.
Yeah.
Okay, so bias and framing shape everything from economics to climate action. And you mentioned earlier that nowhere is this clearer than in conflict zones, where information itself is a battlefield.
Absolutely. The information war is a critical part of modern conflict. Media outlets consciously or not often systematically overreport violence by one side and underreport violence by the other. This fundamentally shapes how external audiences understand the conflict, who they blame, and whether they support intervention.
It dictates the narrative. What's a clear example where we can see this playing out?
The Ukrainian conflict, particularly between 2014 and 2016, is a really well-studied case. Researchers gathered a huge amount of data, over 70,000 violent events reported by Ukrainian sources, rebel sources, Russian sources, and neutral third parties like news agencies and the OSCE.
So they could directly compare how different sides reported the same period. What did they find? A divided narrative.
Completely divided. Ukrainian media sources consistently focused heavily on rebel violence, while downplaying or ignoring government actions. 4 out of 5 major Ukrainian sources significantly overreported rebel attacks.
Okay, so emphasizing the enemy's aggression. What about the other side?
Rebel sources did the exact opposite. They showed extreme bias, reporting almost exclusively on government violence. It was a near-perfect mirror image. Each side painted the other as the sole aggressor.
A perfect mirror image. And Russian sources, where do they fit?
Mostly aligned with the rebels, also disproportionately reporting on Ukrainian government violence, though maybe slightly less intensely biased than the dedicated rebel outlets. There were exceptions, like the independent channel Doj TV, which was closer to the Ukrainian sources reporting.
Interesting. And the neutral sources? The OSCE, Wikipedia.
They tended to be much more cautious. Lots of passive language shelling was reported near Village X, avoiding finger-pointing, trying to maintain neutrality, or in Wikipedia's case, reflecting a crowd-sourced consensus that smooths out extremes.
So it wasn't just who was reported doing the violence, but how it was described, like focusing on civilian harm.
Yes, that was another key finding. Both Ukrainian and rebel media disproportionately highlighted indiscriminate violence allegedly committed by the other side. Things like shelling, rocket attacks, tactics likely to harm civilians.
Why emphasize that specifically?
Because it paints the enemy as barbaric, immoral, deliberately targeting non-combatants. Ukrainian reports on rebel violence cited indiscriminate tactics 66% of the time. Rebel reports on government violence did so 57% of the time. It fuels outrage and dehumanizes the opponent.
Makes them look like war criminals, essentially. So if you're consuming news from only one side, you're getting a radically different picture of who's the bad guy and how bad they are.
Radically different. And this led to completely different predictions about the conflict. Ukrainian sources saw rebels as far more likely to escalate. Rebel sources saw the government as the main escalator. The neutral sources predicted a much more stable, less violent situation overall. Audiences were living in different perceived realities.
Different realities based on the news feed. What drives this bias? Is it just propaganda, or are there other factors?
It's a mix. Simple lack of information plays a role. Events in cities are easier to cover than rural battles. Access, infrastructure, danger to journalists all limit what gets reported. But information provider decisions are huge.
Meaning news outlets choosing what to run.
Yes, driven by newsworthiness, but also heavily by the political environment. Governments pressure media, impose censorship, create loyal outlets. Kyiv banned Russian channels, created an information ministry, raided critical papers. Rebels seized TV towers, set up their own news agency. It's direct control and indirect pressure.
A very constrained information environment.
Absolutely. And you also get false equivalence, where media try to seem balanced by giving equal weight to fringe views and establish consensus, which itself creates a distortion.
Right. So what effect does all this biased reporting actually have on people outside the conflict, like us? Does it change public support for intervention?
It does. An experiment tested this with U.S. respondents. They read generic news stories about a civil war, but the stories varied who was blamed for violence and what tactics were used.
What happened?
Providing specific details, even biased ones, significantly increased support for international intervention and for taking sides. Knowing who supposedly did what makes people want to get involved.
Okay, specifics drive action. But what mattered more, who did it or how they did it? The indiscriminate shelling versus targeted strikes.
This was the really striking part. Actor attribution, who was named as the perpetrator, mattered more than the tactics used.
More than whether civilians were shelled indiscriminately.
Yes. People were more likely to support intervention against whichever side was named as the initiator, regardless of whether the violence was described as indiscriminate or selective. Identifying a villain seemed to be the primary driver for wanting intervention, more so than the specific nature of their actions.
That's surprising.
Yeah.
And worrying. We focus on the who more than the what, even when the what involves horrific tactics.
It seems that way in this context. The desire to punish a perceived perpetrator overrides the details of the transgression to some extent.
Did it matter who intervened, like the U.S. versus an international body?
There was some nuance. People were a bit more hesitant about the U.S. intervening directly against a government force, maybe seeing that as riskier or preferring international coalitions for that. But the overall drive to intervene against the named aggressor was strong, especially using military options over sanctions.
So the bottom line is that this selective reporting really works like propaganda, shaping opinions and policy preferences even far away.
Absolutely. It demonstrates how powerful these biased narratives are in constructing public knowledge and pushing populations towards specific, often partisan policy outcomes.
And this partisan bias, this emotional reaction over pure facts, it bleeds into everything, doesn't it? Even just shopping. We see CEOs taking political stances now, and it causes a real stir.
It definitely does. The marketplace isn't separate from these forces. CEO activism is a real phenomenon. A leader's public political views, or even just their general persona, can significantly hit brand perception and, yes, actual sales.
And we can track this. It's not just noise online.
Yeah. Researchers have used things like mobile phone location data tracking anonymous foot traffic to stores. They found measurable changes in store visits linked to CEO political statements, and the effect differs depending on the political leanings of consumers in that area.
So Republicans might flock to a store if the CEO says something conservative, and Democrats might avoid it, or vice versa, affecting the bottom line.
Exactly. It shows partisan bias directly influencing consumer behavior in the real world, not just online clicks. And it connects back to that idea of emotional numeracy, too.
How so?
People aren't just making purely rational calculations about product price and quality. They're reacting emotionally to the perceived values or message of the brand, often channeled through the CEO's stance. Buying from or boycotting a brand becomes a way to express your own identity and values. It's a form of non-market differentiation for companies, too, using social stances to attract specific customer segments.
So even choosing where you buy coffee can become a political statement influenced by these deep biases and frames.
It certainly can. The lines are increasingly blurred.
Wow. We have covered a lot of ground today, from those subtle word changes in politics to the starkly divided reporting in conflict zones, even down to how a CEO's tweets might change where we shop. It really feels like the world we experience is constantly being shaped, filtered, framed, often without us noticing.
It's a powerful realization, isn't it? But understanding these mechanisms, our own mental shortcuts, our emotional triggers, the intentional framing by others, it's not just interesting, it's genuinely empowering.
Oh, sorry.
Because awareness gives you a degree of control. It allows you to pause, to question the frame being presented, to ask, what's being emphasized here? What's being left out? Why might this be framed this way? It helps you seek out different perspectives.
Becoming a more critical consumer of information.
Exactly. A more discerning citizen, consumer, thinker. It's about developing that critical curiosity, engaging actively with information, not just absorbing it passively.
It reminds me of that H.G. Wells quote, that statistical thinking, understanding data and how it's presented, will one day be as necessary for citizenship as reading and writing.
That's a perfect way to put it. This deep dive really underscores that. Becoming truly informed isn't just about gathering facts. It's about understanding the lenses, both external and internal, through which those facts are shown and seen.